Welcome to this edition of Film Seizure Streams the Movies. I am Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the Film Seizure podcast that you can catch each Wednesday morning with my co-hosts Jason Oliver and Chuck Moore, and my solo show Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon. You can catch both of those shows at filmseizure.com. This time around, I have a special early review of the latest documentary from Seth Breedlove and Small Town Monsters. And this time it's On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Discovery. This will be made available on DVD, Blu-ray, and streaming on November 2nd from smalltownmonsters.com and several streaming platforms such as Amazon, Vudu, iTunes, and Fandango now. And this is the latest in the On the Trail series that we've looked at before. Now, there are a few ongoing series that revolve around UFOs, hauntings, and, well, naturally, Bigfoot. The last time we checked in on the Bigfoot series, we were on the eastern part of the United States in upstate New York and western Massachusetts. Now we go back to where the Bigfoot legend really seemed to kind of originate, the Pacific Northwest. And to be more exact, it's Washington State. Now, I've said this over and over with these Small Town Monsters productions, but I think it bears repeating. This is a crew that pays a great deal of reverence for not only the subject matter, but also the people they interview and the areas that they visit. As this documentary opens, we're taken to the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. Now, this was an area that director and narrator Seth Breedlove had visited before. However, his crew's last visit in, I believe it was 2019, was cut incredibly short due to altitude sickness. So they're back and ready to investigate the area with a group of locals who, at first at least, come across as not your typical cranks that you might expect in your run-of-the-mill Animal Planet or Travel Channel Bigfoot or cryptid hunting show. But more on that here in a little bit. Breedlove talks about the questions and the skepticism around the search for Sasquatch, or what we would deem to be something approximating Sasquatch. Naturally, there's the classic film taken decades ago that is often routinely indisputed, then debunked, and then made indisputable evidence again. And we've all seen that film, and it lights the imagination of anyone who is either a believer or wants to believe in this hairy beast that being out there somewhere. But there are some decent questions asked from both sides of the conversation. Why don't we have a body? Why are pictures always so fuzzy? If we agree that there are a few species of bears in the area, why then would there not be carcasses of bears? When we all very much agree that those things are real too. Is there something we're overlooking? Is there something we don't understand about the acidic soil that is often found here in North America that causes quicker decomposition? But what it ultimately all comes down to, though, is that there are people who are more than happy to spend their time looking and trying to find the answers. In the Olympic Peninsula, there's an incredible denseness of the swampy rainforest. Because of the region's massive rainfall, dense forest, Rocky Mountain-like landscape, the area is kind of thought of to be mostly untouched by people on the whole. Sure, there are little places here and there that are cultivated and harvested, but the terrain is similar to where you would typically find large apes. So the prevailing thought has always been that the conditions are right for there to be the possibility of something like the Sasquatch living in the area. So with that comes the historical stories that we often see in Breedlove's movies about how early settlers would mostly report incidences with something peculiar in the area. And almost none of these incidences were friendly. There are several reported deaths due to severe head trauma, as if a rock had been kind of smashed the person in the back of the head. There are reports of hunters and their dogs being attacked by something large and unfriendly. And, of course, there are the stories of the people who currently live in the area and what they saw at some point in their past or recently, or as most of these typically are usually told from something they saw as a kid or something that they heard somebody else tell about. Now, ultimately, this documentary is about the Olympic Project. This group of investigators is really the most modern and, if not well-funded, at least seemingly well-equipped group of trackers and those who would more consistently follow up on reports that locals have. Long before the Olympic Project was formed, there were wealthy individuals willing to stake what is pretty much called less wealthy folks to try to investigate. But honestly, it was apparently poorly run, leaving it to just being sighting chasing. So with affordable technology, particularly in audio, increasing over the last couple of decades, the group is now well equipped to really kind of start uncovering peculiar recordings of howls and other sounds that don't really sound like the typical animals of the area. Now, I do like that one of the investigators they talked to is a sound guy, and he's a middle-aged man who I think was a hunter or is a hunter or a man who spends a lot of time in nature. And he fully admits that he doesn't know what all the sounds of the forest are. He says he thought he knew what all the animals in the area would sound like, but he's perfectly fine with saying he's discovered that he doesn't. He also owns up to the fact that he does have to deal with budgetary limitations. He's got a pretty nice microphone that sits out in the forest to record sounds long term, usually all night long. But he almost wants to leave enough skepticism alive to be at least seemingly scientific about what he does and try to be as honest as possible. But not only is that really pretty humble, it is fair. The group works from and they do try to say that they do work from a process to help backtrack through by eliminating known origins of sounds or footprints, etc. So they try not to be immediately accepting of whatever evidence they are given by default. But I have a little bit of a caveat there that I'll talk about here a little bit later. Now, of course, if you already believe that Bigfoot is a thing and need not be convinced further, well, you're just going to accept that what they do is provide the most credible evidence ever, maybe since that old film that was taken that everybody has seen before. However, if you are taking things and examining it from a more scientific way by first trying to disprove it until you can't any longer, then you see that what they are collecting is fairly compelling, if not fully proving the existence of Bigfoot. Now, there are two things that really stood out in this documentary that has been a little different than the previous entry in the On the Trail of Bigfoot series. The first was what I was just talking about, the way this Olympic Project group collects and wants to study the evidence that they get. Now, while I would say it's fair to say that the group doesn't really take us through each individual step of how they try to at least label their evidence as unexplained or potential proof of Sasquatch and so forth, I'll have more to say about that here in a moment. But the recordings they have is not without value. Maybe some of what they've recorded are your normal animals, but I can't tell you what they are. There is a kind of central focus in the area that's in this area that they mostly tried to investigate that's called the Nest. It appears to be an area in which something or someone created what looks to be something like bedding in the forest. Now, Breedlove's reaction to this is kind of interesting because I think I hold the same idea about the significance or the profundity as he did. It's a little bit hard to explain exactly what the reaction should be to this if you're not really part of this group. The other element that definitely stood out is the landscape itself. The Pacific Northwest is a very unique area of the country. With the rainfall, the moisture in the air, and the green of it all, it's gorgeous. It's so wet in the area that moss hangs off tree limbs almost as if the moss are leaves. The landscape is interesting itself. It's dense. It's green for as far as the eye can see, and it is, like I said, truly beautiful. However, if there was a negative I could give this documentary, would be that in the end, we're seeing a lot of interviews from a group of people that, while they are presented in a way that they attempt to study evidence in the scientific way, ultimately more and more they reveal themselves to be maybe a club of people who aren't really taking things as scientifically as much as they're as they are ultimately buying into their own hype. We have people who aren't entirely sure what it would mean to them if they were to find out that there is this new type of creature in these woods. We have people who seem very steadfast that what they're doing is the right thing. They talk about they would get out of the way if a true group of scientific people came in to comb the area. I don't know if I necessarily buy that. We also have a couple of people in this who, and this may be slightly unfair of me, but I think they may be possibly just as interested in shooting the creature as they are discovering the creature. I feel weird saying that, but there's something about them that comes off as these people are hunters first, not really the scientists that the group claims that everybody is. We have people pointing to a mass of sticks and claiming it's designed by something intelligent, but it's hard to see what they're talking about beyond that they know it's something that they think it is. And I'm sure all these members of this club are well-meaning, but as the documentary went on, I began to wonder if it really was a club that was easy to get into by expressing interest in Bigfoot and a willingness to believe the evidence they found, or if it's truly a club that is honestly judicious over who they allow into the group and give access to their stuff. Are they expanding the group to people who seem maybe unfit or unused to camping and being in the wilderness to maybe expand enough to be able to point to them and say, well, this person is part of our group, so that expands our message or makes us more legitimate or whatever? Or do each and every single member of the group really have a unique purpose for being in this group? This documentary is a little bit more hit and miss and kind of patchy for me compared to the usual documentaries that I've covered from Small Town Monsters. While I do think that there are some interesting things in this documentary, like the recordings, the fact that the area may very well hide things that we haven't yet discovered, whether it's a new creature or a new behavior in a known creature. I think the problem with this documentary is that the group Breedlove and crew are with during the course of the film ultimately reveal a little bit too much of their hand. They may be really trying to do things scientifically in how they handle their evidence, but they may be working backwards from their own conclusion. They see a nest that they connect it to something a tad more human by claiming it's too intelligent or too, quote, militaristic. And yes, they say the nest suggests a strategic military formation for the safety of whatever might have created it. We mostly see a pile of sticks that could be made by a camper or a species of bear that has learned to do this more recently. While I say this rate's a little higher than your run-of-the-mill Bigfoot hunting show on basic cable because this is a Small Town Monsters production and I know and trust their work, ultimately, I'm not sure this is as dynamic or as compelling as it could have been. It starts to have more of a feel of the regular Joe working backwards from their conclusion, even if they are still trying to follow a scientific method, then it really does, leaving open these new possibilities and interesting stories in an area that is truly beautiful and mysterious. This is ultimately a miss for me. I think it might appeal to those who are Bigfoot enthusiasts. I mentioned previously in the last Bigfoot, on the Trail of Bigfoot documentary that I did, that Bigfoot doesn't quite appeal to me as much as some of the other cryptids do. And I think a lot of that is due to the lack of really new and interesting takes on how to find a new creature without already being convinced that it exists or should exist. So with that, I think I'm going to bring this review to a close. If you are a Bigfoot fan, then I probably think you would get a lot of value out of this. For me, not being as big into Bigfoot, I'm going to have to say that this is a pass for me and a miss ultimately, which really does kind of stink because I really do like what Small Town Monsters does. And I look forward to whatever they have still coming out in the future. So don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram so you can be made aware of new episodes of our various shows as they drop. You can also follow us at podcast providers like SoundCloud, Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and Audible. You can also listen to the show on YouTube by subscribing to us there. And as we hit the start of 2022, my show Monster Mondays will be found on YouTube exclusively, so be sure you are subscribed so that you can watch the revamped and relaunched version of that show. I will be back a little bit later this week with a review of Marvel's Eternals, so be sure to check that out. But until then, don't forget to save me a spot at the end of the couch.